In this demo, we're going to show you how to record the VAT for a foreign invoice that has local tax applied. This tax is usually non-recoverable and therefore treated as an expense. This is an invoice from a Turkish supplier. Usually, when goods or services are sold to a customer in a different country or outside the EU if the supplier is in the EU, the tax is out of scope and so none is charged. However, some services such as legal fees may be required to have local tax applied to them, even if the customer is in a different country. The first part of the invoice is for legal fees, shown here in the red box, whilst the second part of the invoice is for disbursements, where the VAT is out of scope, shown here in the blue box. If we take a closer look at the invoice, you can clearly see a VAT charge for the legal fees, but there is no VAT for the disbursements. The VAT amount is also 18%, which is the local tax rate and clearly not the standard rate. So let's go to the AP invoice workbench. We enter the supplier, the invoice number, and then the invoice total amount, which includes the local tax. We go to the invoice lines and we enter the two lines as shown in the supplied invoice. We can now click on the Calculate Tax button. By default, the tax engine assumes that the supplier is from outside the EU and applies a reverse charge offset tax for the supply of services which would have a net tax amount of 0. As we already know that a local tax has been supplied, we need to choose an override value from the tax override field. Click in the tax override field and choose the No Reverse Charge Local Tax on invoice. Click the Calculate Tax button, but has now generated a single tax line for line 1, but for a different amount on the invoice. This is by design, as we now need to amend the tax amount. Click the Tax Details button. For line 1, no reverse charge foreign tax has been determined with a default rate of 27%. We can either modify the tax amount or, as I am doing here, change the rate from 27 to 18%. When I hit the Tab key to the next field, the tax amount automatically updates, and as we can see, it is the same amount as that on the invoice. We can see that the invoice balances, and now I can validate the invoice. As expected, the invoice needs revalidation. If we look at the reason, it is due to a tax range hold. This is because we have a tolerance of 5 pence, and as the original tax amount was for 27% and we have changed it to 18%, the tolerance has been exceeded and a hold placed. To release the hold, enter the release reason. And if we go back, the status now says validated. This completes the session.